I'm Sheldon Neil. There were over 7,600 new confirmed COVID-19 cases reported nationwide yesterday, bringing the total of cases to more than 1,060,000. There were 28 new reported deaths, boosting Canada's death toll to 23,315. Ontario reported its highest new case count with a record 4,400. Quebec reported the next highest number of new infections with over 1,500. Alberta had nearly 1,200. No new cases were reported in any of the three territories, PEI or Newfoundland and Labrador. The pace of vaccine deliveries to Canada is expected to slow a bit in the week ahead, with only 1 million shots scheduled to arrive over the next 7 days. More than 797,000 people, or 2.1% of the population, have been fully vaccinated. More than 10.6 million doses of vaccine have been delivered to the provinces so far. The rush to get vaccines into Canadian arms has grown more urgent amid a continued surge in the number of new COVID infections. The country's leading physician says there continues to be a concerning rise in cases of COVID-19 variants. Dr. Theresa Tam says national ICU admissions increased by 23% over the last 7 days compared to the week before. She adds the spike is putting a strain on the country's healthcare system. Dr. Tam says Canada is nearing the peak of the current wave of the pandemic. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says the Liberals have failed in their response to COVID-19. The New Democrats ended their problem-plagued 3-day policy convention with an attack on the Liberals. Computer glitches, delays, and accusations overshadowed much of the first 2 days of their virtual meeting. Mr. Singh delivered a message of fair treatment, financial relief, while pointing to Liberal shortcomings on pandemic response and wealth distribution. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau delivered a keynote address over the weekend to end the party's first ever virtual national convention. During his campaign-like speech, the Prime Minister highlighted his government's achievements on tough issues like COVID-19 vaccines. He boasted his team has done more, and far more, than the Conservative prediction. It would take years to get vaccines for COVID-19. Erin Otoole is assuring Conservative supporters he never hid who he was in his bid to secure the party leadership.
I didn't hide who I was when I was running for leader. I've always voted in terms of human rights protections for LGBTQ Canadians, for women. I've always compared it to me serving in the military. I've served alongside some exceptional people, and I'm here to support their rights 100% and to make their lives more prosperous. I'm not here to divide. I didn't hide any of that. I inspected and worked in and around pipelines and oil. I'm very, very much a supporter of our energy sector.
Mr. O'Toole says the, quote, true blue campaign he ran to secure the party leadership reflects his true colors. Mr. O'Toole was speaking during a question and answer session with journalist Brian Lilly at the Canada Strong and Free network hosted by the News Forum. The theme of the conference was Build Back Right. Russia wants a bigger claim to what lies on the Arctic Ocean floor. The country recently filed documents with the United Nations to expand its claim to the Arctic Ocean seabed and anything below it. Arctic security and defense analyst Robert Hubert says Russia's new submission gets as close to Canada's exclusive economic zone as legally possible. The UN still has to review the submission, but if approved, it would give Russia exclusive rights to potential resources in parts of the Arctic Ocean's soil and subsoil. Hundreds of people gathered outside an Alberta church that has been charged with refusing to follow COVID-19 health rules. Some tore down fences Alberta Health Services had erected last week around Grace Life Church west of Edmonton, but the RCMP immediately put them back up. Those who gathered to protest pandemic restrictions sang hymns and prayed for the church to reopen as dozens of police kept watch. The church released a statement last night saying their members were not at the protest. Muslims in Canada and around the world are navigating COVID public health regulations for their second Ramadan in the shadow of the pandemic. This year, Ramadan comes amid an intense new coronavirus wave. Islam's holiest month is a time of fasting, charity, and worship, but also for group prayers and gatherings of family and friends for festive communal meals at the end of the daily fast. Well, don't go away. After the break, a new poll by the Angus Reid Institute and think tank Cardus looks at the restrictions on religious gathering during the pandemic. Stay with us. According to a survey conducted by the Angus Reid Institute in partnership with the think tank Cardus, 4 in 10 Canadians attending religious gatherings say restrictions caused by COVID-19 is harder on places of worship than any other public venues. The belt has been especially tightened on religious gatherings in places like British Columbia and Alberta. According to the survey, more than 7 in 10 people say their place of religious gathering has been mostly or entirely closed since March of last year. Ray Pennings, the executive vice-president of Cardus, says, quote, evidence shows widespread compliance with public health orders among religious communities, despite a significant feeling the orders have been unfair when compared to other places where folks gather, end quote. So what does this all mean? Here to help us unpack it all is Ray Pennings, Executive Vice President of Cardus. He joins me now. Welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, the report says that complying with health orders has taken a toll on religiously observant Canadians. In what way?
Well, there's a number of ways. I think it's important to understand that religion is a core part of the identity for religious Canadians. So not being able to participate in religious gatherings in many ways is like telling people not being able to eat. Feeding the soul is as important as feeding the body. In our survey, we asked very specifically in terms of what aspects of religious life that people were missing in particular. More than half indicated there was something of a feeling of community and belonging that came from attending religious gatherings. For about 40%, there were ceremonies, baptism, participating in the Eucharist. For 30%, there was just a sense of the sacred, that being part of a worship service and sacred space there, and their experience of being with God certainly was being impacted by the lockdown.
And how have restrictions towards places of worship compared to that of other public venues?
The answer to that, of course, varies very significantly across the country and even in different regions. So there isn't a single answer. I think for the most part, in different jurisdictions, there in some cases have been comparable jurisdictions. But then I think of a place like British Columbia. To me, one story that I heard a month or so ago,
Yes.
Apparently the RCMP were called to investigate what they thought was a violation of a church service in
Yes.
British Columbia. Since November, religious gatherings have been outlawed entirely, and only the staff allowed for online is allowed to be at a place of worship.
Yes.
They came to investigate, and it turns out it was a movie shoot
Yes.
of a church process. And it turns out the movie shoot is legal, but the actual church gathering is not. So it was okay, according to the law, to take a movie of
Yes.
a church gathering, but it was illegal to actually hold a church gathering itself. And it's that sort of contradiction, I think, that makes these people very, very frustrated.
We talk about contradictions, while some may be claiming religious places of worship are being unfairly treated, many places of worship have chosen to remain open, or have not chosen to remain open. I mean, I'm wondering, are people calling for a change religious leaders aren't really asking for?
Well, I think it is important. Certainly, there are a number of places that have opened and continue to open against the rules, and they certainly have dominated headlines. It would appear, though, from the data, the vast majority have not. I also think that, just because something isn't in the headlines, it does not mean that dialogue is not happening. I, for one, was a co-signatory with 13 other religious leaders in Ontario, including Sikh, Muslim, Jewish, and Christians of various denominations.
Yes.
As a result of some of the dialogue that we had, we got to meet with the Premier, Minister of Health, and Public Officer of Health,
Yes.
and see some changes to the particular regulations as it applied to religious venues. So there is, that didn't take place in the headlines, and nobody's going to court over the matter, but it doesn't mean the dialogue's not happening.
How have these faith restrictions added to the economic and social challenges that people have faced during the pandemic?
Yeah, often I think people misunderstand this element of religion, thinking this just affects the less than 20% or so of the population who who prior to the pandemic were very regularly attending places of worship. Most people would be surprised to know that religion itself provides almost $70 billion to national GDP. It does so through social services, education, counseling. There are a host of things that happen in religious organizations that impact everyone in the public. And, I always find it helpful to point out to people that for every dollar that is receipted for a religious organizations, $4.77 of public good comes.
Yukon residents head to the polls today for what will be the 5th election in Canada since the COVID-19 pandemic began. The Yukon Liberals were elected in 2016 with a majority government. Liberal leader Sandy Silver says now is not the time to change course. Yukon Party leader Curry Dixon says he would follow through on election promises, while NDP leader Kate White says the pandemic has highlighted gaps in equality. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says he believes Calgary Stampede will be able to go ahead this July if the province can get through the next few weeks and defeat the current COVID-19 spike. Premier Kenney told a news conference over the weekend that if people stop socializing in groups and follow public health guidelines, the vaccines will catch up to the COVID-19 variants of concern more quickly. Mr. Kenney says he still believes the majority of Alberta's public health restrictions can be lifted in June. Adult residents and workers in Whistler, BC will be able to receive COVID-19 vaccinations starting today. Whistler Mayor Jack Crompton says the move will protect both his town and those who come to visit. Those eligible must provide proof of their permanent residency in Whistler or a recent pay stub to confirm their employment in the area. A Toronto area man believed to be Canada's first double lung transplant recipient due to COVID-19 hopes his experience serves as a lesson to those doubting the seriousness of the virus. Timothy Suave of Mississauga spent 2 months in the intensive care units of 2 different Toronto area hospitals after contracting the virus in December. While his lungs were scarred beyond repair, the virus didn't damage any other organ, making him a candidate for the rare life-saving procedure in February. Provincial police arrested 2 people and seized more than $25,000 in counterfeit Canadian currency during a Friday morning raid on a home in Orillia. Police say officers seized the fake bills, a quantity of cocaine, a conductive energy weapon, a prohibited knife, and an imitation handgun. 2 people, both from Orillia, have been charged with possession of a substance for the purpose of trafficking, possession of counterfeit money, and possession of a prohibited device or ammunition. Ontario hospitals will start dialing back elective surgeries and non-urgent procedures today to ensure they have the capacity to treat more COVID-19 patients. Health Minister Christine Elliott says the move could increase ICU capacity by up to 1,000 patient beds. As of yesterday, 605 people are in ICU, and the province reported a record high number of new infections at more than 4,400. Business owners in Old Montreal will be assessing the damage this morning after an anti-curfew protest last evening turned violent. Hundreds gathered in defiance of Sunday night's curfew bump up to 8 p.m. in Montreal and Laval as the province works to stem the rise in COVID-19 infections. Police fired tear gas and rushed the crowd, prompting dozens to scatter and cause mayhem down the streets of Montreal's historic tourist district by lighting garbage fires and throwing things at windows. High school students across New Brunswick are back to online learning today following a weekend decision to delay a resumption of full-time in-person learning. Health Minister Dorothy Shepherd says because of a recent increase in COVID-19 cases, the precaution is necessary for the time being and will be revisited during the week of April 26th. Health officials reported 9 new cases of the virus yesterday, including 5 more in the Edmundston region, where several areas are again under full lockdown. A New Brunswick First Nation is first year's Craft Hockeyville winner. The LC Puktuk First Nation will get $250,000 for upgrades to its arena and an opportunity to host an NHL preseason game. The Chief Young Eagle Recreation Center, which first opened its doors in 1979, was damaged in a fire last fall. As a result, Kraft says the preseason game venue and timing will be made at a later date. 2 Canadians have a lot to be proud of as they head home from the first men's golf major of the year at Georgia's Augusta National. Corey Connors of Listowel, Ontario, finished 6 strokes behind the winner, Japan's first ever male major champ, Hideki Matsuyama. Mr. Connors and his helpful Saturday hole-in-one left him tied for 8th place with American Patrick Reed. Fellow Canadian Mackenzie Hughes finished in a 6-way tie for 40th. Well, don't go away. Our international segment coming up next. A funeral date has been set for Prince Philip. Iran blames Israel for nuclear site sabotage, and China's CDC considers mixing vaccines. Stay with us. Prince Charles says the royal family is deeply grateful for the outpouring of support they've received following the death of Prince Philip. The heir to the throne made a deeply personal statement saying his dear Papa was a very special person who would have been amazed by the reaction and the touching things that have been said about him. The 99-year-old Duke died Friday morning. A royal ceremonial funeral will take place April 17th at Windsor Castle. Iran has blamed Israel for a sabotage attack at underground Natanz nuclear facility that damaged the centrifuges it uses to enrich uranium. Israel has not claimed responsibility for the sabotage incident, though Israeli media says it was caused by a cyber attack. Details remain scarce about what happened early Sunday at the facility. The event initially was described as a blackout caused by the electrical grid feeding its above-ground workshops and underground enrichment halls. The United Nations say 3 facilities belonging to international aid partners were targeted overnight in northeast Nigeria. A breakaway faction of Boko Haram threatened Nigerians that they would be targeted if they assisted international aid groups in the northeast. One of the groups targeted was the Norwegian Refugee Council, which said vehicles used to bring aid to civilians were destroyed in the attack. High schools have reopened in Greece to students in the final 3 grades, with the mandatory use of test kits for COVID-19 being rolled out across the country to help with mass screening for infections, with an eye to further reopening the economy and tourism. Students from grades 10 to 12 were allowed to return to class, most for the first time in 5 months, if they provided a negative test result using the kits being distributed at pharmacies. Some teachers chose to hold classes outdoors. As other countries rolled out their vaccination campaigns over months, Bhutan is nearly done just 16 days after it started. The tiny Himalayan kingdom has vaccinated nearly 93% of its adults. Its small population helped Bhutan move fast, but dedicated volunteers and the use of cold chain storage from earlier vaccination drives are credited as well. Bhutan distributed the shots to coincide with dates in Buddhist astrology, and the recipients of the first shots were women born in the year of the monkey. In a rare admission of the weakness of Chinese coronavirus vaccines, the country's top disease control official says their effectiveness is low and the government is considering mixing them to give them a boost. Speaking at a conference, the China Centers for Disease Control director said the Chinese vaccines simply don't have very high protection rates. Beijing has distributed hundreds of millions of doses in other countries while also trying to promote doubt about the effectiveness of the Western vaccines. A cyclone has damaged several towns on Australia's western coast, shattering windows, snapping trees, and knocking out power to thousands of homes. Tropical cyclone Saroja had gusts up to 170 kilometers per hour as it crossed the coast near the tourist town of Calgary. Emergency officials say around 70% of the town's buildings were damaged, and about half of that damage was significant. The same cyclone caused flooding and landslides that killed at least 174 people in Indonesia and East Timor last week. The new book, Do Not Disturb, by British author Michaela Wrong, questions why some in the international community continue to praise Rwandan President Paul Kagame, despite repression in his Central African country where he could rule until 2034. President Kagame's high profile is due to his role as the leader of rebels who ended Rwanda's 1994 genocide and rebuilt the country. But critics allege the reconstruction came at the expense of basic freedoms in a country where the president faces no credible opposition. The death of Prince Philip has reminded a small French village in Manitoba about how a royal visit half a century ago helped make it the center of frog racing in Canada. St. Pierre Joly was selected as a stop on the royal tour for the Queen and Prince Philip during Manitoba's centennial in 1970. The French village was inspired by the nickname of frogs and decided to create a frog jumping competition at the festival. More than 50 years later, the Frog Follies Festival is still going strong. Well, I'm Sheldon Neil, and this was Forum Daily. Thank you for joining us. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.